All right. Namaste. Welcome, everybody. Um, Radha was just pointing out to me that we are getting close to having been doing this for a full year now. So thanks to everyone who's still here regularly listening to these. Yeah, it's been a long time, but we are right in the kind of the penultimate crest jewel of the whole Bhagavatam right now, the whole story of the Leelas of Krishna's childhood in Book 10. Starting today with Book 10, Discourse 10, which is the imprecation pronounced on Kubera's sons by Narada and their consequent redemption. So this follows right after the last story we had last time, in which the young child Sri Krishna was, after being mischievous and breaking a milk churn and so on, he was tied to a wooden mortar, a heavy wooden mortar, by Mata Yashoda. And Shukadeva had just mentioned that the Lord Sri Krishna noticed a pair of Arjuna trees that had been in their previous life two yakshas, son of Kubera, the bestower of riches, full of splendor, known as Nalakubara and Manigriva, and reduced to the state of trees due to a curse uttered by Narada on account of their arrogance. So immediately following that, the Raja Parikshit said, "That highly reproachful act, which was the cause of the imprecation pronounced on them by Narada, and due to which anger was aroused in the Devarishi, may kindly be pointed out, O Holy One." Sri Shuka replied, "The two sons of Kubera, who were highly vainglorious despite their being attendants of Lord Rudra, whose passion was uncontrollable, and who had drunk the wine called Varuni, a divine wine, were strolling with women, singing after them, in a woodland full of blossoms in the vicinity of the Mandakini River, flowing through the delightful garden of Kailasa, their eyes rolling on all sides from intoxication." So since this is in the garden of the celestial Kailasa, this refers not to the physical river Mandakini that is in North India, but the celestial Ganga, while flowing through the heavenly regions, goes by the name of Mandakini. So this is not on Earth. This is in a celestial loka. Entering the middle of the Ganga, studded with a series of lotus beds, they sported with damsels as a pair of elephants would with she-elephants. By the will of Providence, O scion of Kuru, the glorious Narada, the Devarishi, saw the two demigods there and perceived them intoxicated. Abashed to see him, uncovered as they were and afraid of a curse, the celestial nymphs, the Apsaras, hurriedly put on their clothes, but not so the two yakshas, who remained naked. Seeing the two sons of Kubera, inebriate with wine and blind with the pride of wealth, Narada, who felt inclined to pronounce an imprecation for the sake of showering his grace on them, spoke as follows. "Indeed, in the case of a man indulging in enjoyable objects, no pride other than the pride of wealth, such as that of pedigree or learning, which is a product of Rajoguna, conduces to his loss of reason, so much as the pride of wealth. With pride of wealth, woman, gambling, and liquor are invariably associated. Where there is pride of wealth, animals are killed by merciless men of uncontrolled mind who regard this perishable body as proof against old age and death. Though styled while living as a god, the body is ultimately designated as a worm when buried, or as to be eaten by worms, or as ordure if devoured by carnivorous animals or birds, or as ashes. Is a man perpetrating violence from which follows perdition against living beings for the sake of pampering such a body alive to his own interest? Does this body belong to the giver of food, one's employer or the maintainer of one's body, or to one's father and mother, who conceived it and nourished it, or to one's mother's father, or to a powerful man such as a king who one may serve, or to one who has purchased it, or for that matter, to a dog who is going to devour it after death? knowing the body to be a common property, as aforesaid, that many have claim to it, many contribute to its well-being, and many may partake of its labor or physically eat it, and having its source in and disappearing into the unmanifest primordial matter, identifying himself with it, who else than a fool would kill animals? Poverty is the best eye salve for a wicked soul blinded with the pride of wealth. A poor man alone looks upon living beings as similar to his own self. He who has his foot pricked with a thorn would never have a fellow being suffer such agony, having realized the similarity of all living beings, so far as the experience of pleasure and pain is concerned, by means of external signs. Such is not the case with him whose foot has never similarly been pricked with a thorn. Rid of all forms of pride, a poor man is divested of the stiffness induced by egotism. The hardship he experiences by the will of Providence actually proves to be his highest austerity in this life. The indriyas of a poor man, whose body is ever emaciated from hunger and who is longing for food, soon grow feeble, and his violence too ceases. Pious souls looking upon all with the same eye come into contact only with a poor man, and not with the rich, blinded with the pride of wealth. Consorting with saints, a poor man gives up the thirst for money, etc., even for noble pursuits, and then gets absolutely purified soon. What purpose of pious souls, possessed of equanimity and hankering for the feet of Lord Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation, can be served through the wicked, who are proud of their wealth and bank only on the objects of senses that have no ultimate reality, and therefore deserve to be ignored. Hence I shall take away the pride resulting from ignorance of these two slaves of women, of their own uncontrolled mind, drunk with the wine called Varuni, and blinded with the pride of wealth. Since in spite of their being the sons of Kubera, a Lokapala, or a guardian of the world, the two youths are too immersed in ignorance to recognize themselves as uncovered, highly vainglorious as they are, hence they deserve the state of a tree, so that by my grace they may not behave like this again, and let self-consciousness persist in them by my favor, even in that state. Attaining to the presence of Lord Vasudeva at the end of 100 celestial years, and recovering their abode in heaven, they will then have acquired devotion too. Sri Shuka continued, saying so, the said Devarishi Narada went away to the ashrama of the Devarishi Narayana, the avatar Narayana, the sage, while Nalakubara and Manigriva were transformed into two Arjuna trees sprung together, born down in the forest of Raja in Bhumiloka. In order to substantiate the prediction of Narada, the foremost of the devotees of the Lord, Sri Hari, who stood tied to the mortar, in other words, Damodara is the name of Krishna that refers to his being bound to the mortar, proceeded slowly to the spot where the two Arjuna trees stood as twins, and thought to himself, since Devarishi Narada is most beloved of me, therefore I shall redeem the two sons of Kubera in the same way as has been prophesied by that exalted soul. With this end in view, Sri Krishna actually crawled between the two Arjuna trees. With the very interposition of his person, the mortar fell crosswise. So he's dragging this upright, kind of roughly cylindrical. They're kind of shaped like, sort of like an hourglass, if you've ever seen a mortar like this, like a big wooden hourglass basically in shape. So he's dragging it, and it fell down horizontally. And so when he's dragging it between the two trees that are very close together, it's going to get stuck, and he's going to be pulling it against them. Uprooted by the infant Sri Krishna, who had a cord tied around his belly and was dragging the said mortar behind him with great vehemence, the two trees fell down with a terrific crash, their trunk, leaves, and boughs violently shaken by the force exerted by the Supreme Lord. Illuminating the quarters with their great splendor, there rose on that spot, like fire hidden in the two trees, two celestial figures, shorn of pride. Approaching Sri Krishna, the Lord of all the worlds, and bowing down to him with joined palms, they prayed as follows. O Krishna, the enchanter of all, O great yogi, the master of yoga, you are the primordial supreme person. The Brahmanas who have realized the true import of the Vedas know this universe, manifest as well as unmanifest, as a form of yours. You are the one controller of the body, the vital airs, the ego, and the indriyas of all created beings. You alone are the time spirit and the imperishable Lord, the Almighty Vishnu. You are the subtle unmanifest Prakriti, consisting of Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, and you are the Mahattattva, the evolute of Prakriti. You alone are the Purusha, the witness, the knower of the diseases and morbidities of all psychophysical organisms. You cannot be grasped through the modes of Prakriti, much less through their modifications, which are open to perception. And shut up in a psychophysical organism, a product of the three gunas, what jiva in this world is competent to perceive you, who already existed even before the birth of this world, as a self-evident truth? Hail to you as such, Lord Vasudeva, the deity presiding over the intellect, the creator of the universe, the infinite, whose glory stands veiled by the three gunas that owe their light to you. Disembodied as you are, your avataranas in corporeal frames are known through the various feats of valor unsurpassed, unequaled, and not found in those identified with the body. As such, you, the dispenser of all blessings, have come down to the mortal plane this time in your integral form, the source of all the part manifestations, in other words, in a Purana avatar, for ensuring the prosperity and freedom from rebirth of the entire creation. Hail, O most blessed one, hail, O most propitious Lord, hail to the gentle son of Vasudeva, the Lord of the Yadus. Pray allow us, servants of your servant, to depart, O perfect one. Your auspicious sight has been possible for us only through the grace of the Devarishi Narada. Let our speech be employed hereafter in recounting your excellencies, our ears in hearing your stories, our hands in doing your work, our mind in the thought of your feet, our head in bowing to the world, your own abode, and our sight in beholding saints, your embodiments. Sri Sukha went on, thus glorified by them both, and yet remaining tethered to the mortar with a string, Lord Sri Krishna, the ruler of Gokula, spoke laughingly to the Yakshas as follows. The Lord said, it was already known to me how grace was showered on you both through execration by the kind-hearted sage Narada in the form of your utter degradation, blinded as you were with the pride of fortune. From the sight of pious souls treading the path of virtue and possessed of equanimity and self-realization, who have thoroughly applied their minds to me, there follows no bondage, but emancipation for men, any more than the obstruction of eyes from the sight of the rays of the sun. Their bondage ceases even as darkness disappears with sunshine. Therefore, O Nalakubara and Manigriva, return you to your abode, now that you both have realized me as the highest object of your adoration. Supreme devotion to me, leading to cessation of rebirth and sought by you, has been kindled in you. Sri Shuka continued, thus spoken to by the Lord, the two went round the Lord, who was still tied to the mortar, bowed low to him again and again, and taking leave of him, proceeded in a northerly direction. The reason they proceeded in a northerly direction is because when he says, return to your own abode, their abode, of course, is the abode of their father Kubera, who is the Lokapala of the north. Thus ends the 10th discourse, imprecation pronounced on Nalakubara and Manigriva by Narada in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 11, destruction of Vatsasura and Bakasura. Sri Sukha began again. Hearing the noise of the two falling trees, and disturbed with the fear of a thunderbolt, the cowherds headed by Nanda came to that spot, O jewel among the Kurus. So it seems that the whole conversation between the two yakshas and Krishna happened miraculously quickly. Like they could kind of have their own little moment out of time and talk for a few minutes. Whereas to the humans around, they hear the trees crashing, presumably rush straight there. It's right in their backyard. And to them, it seems like this is only a moment later. They saw there the two Arjuna trees fall into the ground. Failing to perceive the cause of their fall, though it was obvious in the shape of the infant Sri Krishna dragging the mortar tied to him with a cord, but of course, it doesn't appear to them that an ordinary baby could have pulled two trees out by the roots. They wondered whose work it was and from what source that strange phenomenon could be. They were alarmed to think that it was an evil portent and felt utterly bewildered. The infants who happened to be playing nearby said the trees were uprooted by this chap who has taken his position between the trees while dragging the mortar that had fallen aslant. We also saw two men rising from the trees. The cowherds did not credit this report because they thought that it was not possible for that child to uproot the two huge trees in that way. Others, who recollected that it was this same child, Sri Krishna, that had seemingly taken the life of Putana and throttled the demon Trinavrata, stood with their mind full of doubt, thinking, so some people are thinking maybe it really was him. Finding his son dragging the mortar, though tied with a cord, Nanda, with a laughing countenance, set him completely free. So the tradition goes. Encouraged by the cowherdesses, by means of coaxing words and assurances, the Lord now danced like an ordinary infant or an ordinary child, and now sang guilelessly at the top of his voice, behaving like a puppet, wholly subject to the gopis' will. Ordered by them, he would now bear a wooden seat, a measure, or a pair of wooden sandals, and strike on his arms like a veteran wrestler. It's this kind of a thing that Indian wrestlers do of slapping their arms, kind of as a warm-up, but mostly just kind of to like emphasize their big muscles, and it's just sort of a gesture that wrestlers in India traditionally do, causing delight to his kinsmen thereby, because obviously it's cute to see a little kid doing that. Demonstrating in the world to those who knew him his own subjection to the will of his servants, the Lord indeed brought joy to the land of Raja through his childish sports. Hearing the words, "Oh, buy fruits," and taking food grains in the hollow of his palms, so in other words, he hears that there's a fruit seller outside, kind of crying her wares, traveling through the village. Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, the dispenser of fruit to all, went forth in haste, desirous of fruits. The fruiteress, the woman selling fruits, filled with fruits both his palms, even though the food grains had slipped through the gaps in his fingers, and the fruit basket of the fruit seller was filled with precious stones. On a certain day, sometime after that, the venerable Rohini called Sri Krishna, who had felled the Arjuna trees, and Balarama, both of whom were fondly playing with other children on the riverbank. When in their fondness for play, the two boys did not return even though called, Rohini sent Yashoda, who was deeply affectionate towards her son. Yashoda repeatedly shouted for Sri Krishna, who'd been playing with his elder brother and other children, beyond the limit of time, her breasts overflowing from affection for her son. "Krishna, Krishna, O darling with lotus-like eyes, come, suck my breasts. Have done with your pastimes. You are emaciated from hunger and fatigued with sport, O dear son. O Rama, dear, come at once with your younger brother, O delight of your race. You had your breakfast early in the morning, hence you ought to eat. The Lord of Raja is waiting for you, O scion of Dasharha, in order to take his meals. Come, bring delight to us both. Return to your home, O boys. Take your bath, my boy, you whose person is soiled with dust. The star presiding over your birth is in the ascendant today. Getting purified, meaning taking a bath. Give away cows to Brahmanas. Lo, look at your playmates who have been washed and well adorned by their mothers. Resume you your play after you have bathed and finished your meals and are well adorned." Saying these sorts of things, and thinking Sri Krishna, the crown of all, to be her son, Yashoda, whose mind was bound with ties of affection for him, O protector of men, clasped him along with Balarama by the hand, and taking them to her house, presently performed rites calculated to bring good luck to them. Observing evil portents of a grave nature at Brahadvana, which is another name for Gokula village, elderly cowherds headed by Nanda came together and deliberated as to what should be done in the interests of Raja. Of them, a cowherd, Upananda by name, who was advanced in wisdom and age, possessed insight into the true nature of things as well as into the peculiarities of time and place, and did what was pleasing to Balarama and Sri Krishna, spoke as follows. "We who wish well of Gokula ought to shift from this place, for here appear evil portents of a grave nature, foreboding destruction of infants. Indeed, this boy Sri Krishna was somehow rescued from the clutches of the Rakshasi Putana, who took the life of infants. It was surely by the grace of Sri Hari that the cart did not fall on him, even though it flipped over with him underneath it. Carried away to the skies, the resort of birds, by a demon in the form of a tornado, He dropped on a rock and was saved even in that predicament by the rulers of the gods, our tutelary deities. He assumes that it must have been that a baby fell from the sky, landed on a rock, and wasn't hurt. That this boy or any other boy too should not die on getting between the two Arjuna trees that crashed down was also an act of deliverance by the immortal Lord Vishnu. Before a calamity foreboded by evil portents should overtake Vraja, we shall shift from here to some other place along with our followers, taking our children with us. There is a forest, Vrindavana by name, suitable for cattle, full of evergreen woodlands, fit to be resorted to by cowherds and cowherdesses, and the bovine race, and consisting of sacred hills, pasturage, and plants. Therefore we shall go there this very day. Get the carts ready, do not tarry. Let the cattle wealth proceed ahead if it pleases you. The cattle wealth, of course, being the cows themselves. Hearing this, the cowherds, who were of one mind, said, right, good. Bringing together their respective herds, and I should mention this, picking up and moving villages is not such a big deal to them because these people, the Gopa Abhira people they're called, are nomads. The size of cowherds they maintain can't be sustained at one spot forever. They'll overgraze. And so habitually they'll pick up and move from village to village. So they're just kind of deciding to do that now because of this, but this isn't like a huge deal for them to abandon their homes or something. They're nomadic people. Bringing together their respective herds, they went forth with their effect loaded on the carts. Putting the aged, children, womenfolk, and all accessories, O Raja, on the carts, and placing the cattle wealth at the head, the cowherds, who were all alert and carried bows, blew horns on all sides and proceeded with their family priests accompanied by a loud flourish of trumpets. Mounted on chariots and splendid with saffron freshly painted on their breasts, gopis, whose necks were adorned with strings of gold coins and who were all finely dressed, delightfully sang the Leelas of Sri Krishna. Similarly mounted on one and the same chariot, Yashoda and Rohini, who were anxious to hear the stories of their darlings, shone with Balarama and Sri Krishna by their side. Duly entering Vrindavana, which was delightful at all times and all seasons, they set up on the first day by means of their carts a crescent-shaped habitation for their cattle. So they make a crescent shape of all the carts, herd the cows into it, and block them in there with the crowd of humans closing it off. At the site of Vrindavana, the Govardhana hill, and the sandy banks of the holy Yamuna river, supreme joy filled the mind of Balarama and Sri Krishna, O protector of men. Affording delight in this way to the inhabitants of Vraja. So Vraja is the greater forest land territory that the Gopa Abhiras moved through that contains many villages. Vrindavana is in one part of Vraja, Gokula was in a nearby part of Vraja. Affording delight in this way to the inhabitants of Vraja by means of their childish gestures and sweet expressions, the two brothers in due time grew to be the keepers of calves. Equipped with various playthings, they pastured the calves not far from the area of the cow pens, in the company of other cowherd boys. Now they played on the flute, and now hurled stones, etc., by means of slings. Sometimes they threw them with their feet, making a tinkling noise with the tiny bells fastened to their girdle. While at other times, they contended with each other, playing the part of bulls and bellowing like bulls in the company of other boys disguised as bulls. Mimicking animals of various kinds by crying like them, they moved about in the woods like ordinary human children. Once, while they were grazing the calves on the bank of the Yamuna, along with their companions, a demon appeared there with intent to slay Sri Krishna and Balarama. Observing him, the demon, disguised as a calf in the herd of calves, trying to sneak up close to them, and pointing him out to Baladeva, who is, of course, Balarama, Sri Hari slowly approached him like an ignorant chap, in other words, pretending he's just walking through the other calves, pretending he hasn't noticed what's going on. Seizing him by the hind legs, tail and all, and revolving him, like picking him up and whirling him around with superhuman strength, the immortal Lord Sri Krishna threw him lifeless against the top of a kapita tree. Along with the kapita fruits that were made to drop by the impact, the demon too, who, while dying, involuntarily gave up his illusory disguise and appeared in his real demoniac body, fell down. Surprised to behold him, the boys raised a shout of applause, saying, "Well done, bravo!" The gods were highly gratified at this and showered flowers. Assuming the role of keepers of calves, the two sole protectors of all the worlds roamed about in the woods, grazing calves with their breakfast in the wallet, or in like a little pouch that they have with them. Reaching the vicinity of a pond with intent to give a drink each to his own herd one day, all made their calves drink water and drank of it themselves. The boys saw standing there a monstrous creature resembling a mountain peak struck off with Indra's thunderbolt. In other words, a mountain peak separated from a mountain, and got frightened. He was indeed a great demon, Baka by name, and disguised as a heron. Approaching all of a sudden, the powerful monster with a sharp beak swallowed Sri Krishna. Perceiving Sri Krishna swallowed by a huge heron, the Gopa boys, led by Balarama, got stupefied like the senses devoid of life. Baka forthwith disgorged Sri Krishna, the son of a cowherd, the father of Brahma, who was burning the root of its palate. In other words, within the mouth of the crane, Sri Krishna made himself burning hot, so that Bakasura would spit him out. And the crane demon rushed once more in a great rage with intent to kill him with its bill. Seeing Baka, a friend of Kansa, rushing towards him and seizing it by the two halves of its bill, Sri Krishna, the protector of the righteous, tore up the demon like a blade of straw in mere sport. In other words, rather gruesomely tore the demon's head in half by the mouth, the way that you might like split, like if there's a blade of grass, the way that you could just split it down the middle, grab the two halves of the heron's beak and literally just tore its head in half. Bringing delight to the denizens of heaven, while the Gopa boys stood looking on. Then the denizens of the celestial region showered the slayer of Baka with jasmine and other blossoms from Indra's garden, Nandana, and cheered him with the beating of drums, blowing of conchas, and the singing of praises. The Gopa boys were filled with wonder to behold this. Relieved to find him released from the mouth of Baka and returned to the sporting ground, the boys headed by Balarama embraced him, even as the senses would welcome life. Collecting the calves, they returned to Vraja, or returned to the village. This is what this means, and narrated the incident. Astonished to hear of it, and greeted by Sri Krishna, who is most beloved of them, the Gopas and Gopis looked on him with thirsty eyes out of eagerness, as though he had returned from the land of the dead. They said to one another, "Oh, dear me, there has been many a mortal enemy of this chap. Evil has, however, befallen them, alone inasmuch as terror was brought by them to others in a previous existence." In other words, that their karma has come upon them. All of the demons and threats that have menaced Sri Krishna only came to harm themselves. Though terrible to look at, they are certainly not able to overpower him all the same. Approaching him with intent to slay him, they perish like moths in fire. The words of the knowers of Brahma can never be untrue. Whatever the worshipful Garga uttered has been fully verified. So more and more, the Gopas and Gopis of Vrindavana are coming to understand that Krishna is some sort of superhuman being, at least. Thus, recounting with joy the story of Sri Krishna and Balarama and rejoicing over it, the Gopas headed by Nanda did not experience the agony of mundane life. In this way, Balarama and Sri Krishna passed their childhood in Vraja in childlike games such as hide and seek, constructing toy dams, and jumping over like monkeys. Thus ends the 11th discourse, entitled The Destruction of Vatsasura and Bakasura, and the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 12, Deliverance of Aghasura. Sri Shuka resumed. Intending to have his midday meal in the forest, and arising early in the morning on a certain day, Sri Hari issued forth from Vraja with calves going before him, waking up his companions, the Gopa boys, with the charming sound of his horn. With him again, affectionate boys equipped with lovely slings, canes, horns, and flutes, sallied forth with joy in thousands, driving before them each his own herd of calves, consisting of more than 1,000 each. Herding their own calves with the numberless calves of Sri Krishna and grazing them, they diverted themselves here and there with childlike sports, so the tradition goes. Already adorned with glass beads, gunja seeds, gems, and gold, they further decked themselves with fruits, tender leaves, bunches of flowers as well as single flowers, peacock feathers, and minerals. Hiding one another's slings and other articles, they flung them away to a distance when the things were discovered. Those seated there threw them farther away and returned them laughing only when the robbed ones got over annoyed. If Sri Krishna went away to a distance in order to witness the sylvan beauty, they vied with one another in touching him first and felt delighted to embrace him. Some played on flutes, others blew horns, still others hummed in tune with bees, while some more uttered sweet notes with cuckoos. Others took delight in running fast with the shadows of birds, and walking gracefully in the company of swans, sitting in a line with herons, and dancing with peacocks. Some more rejoiced in pulling the tails of monkeys and climbing up the trees along with them. Others made a wry face after the monkeys, in other words, imitating the facial expressions of monkeys, and leapt with them on trees. Still others, who dove in rivers and in cascades, hopped with frogs, while some made fun of their own reflections and cursed their echoes. Possessed of a rich store of punyam, or of merit, earned by them in the past, they sported thus with Sri Krishna, who combines in himself absolute existence, unmixed bliss, and pure consciousness in the eyes of the wise. In other words, absolute Satchidanandam. The supreme deity in the eyes of those who have accepted his service, and a mere human child in the eyes of those who have hugged the Maya. Beyond the following, how can it be possible to describe the good luck of the inhabitants of Vraja, within the range of whose vision stood in person the self-same Lord, the dust of whose feet cannot be had even by adepts in yoga, who have controlled their mind by rigid austerities continued through many lives. Presently there came a mighty demon, Agha by name, who did not brook the sight of their happy sport, and whose vulnerable point was ever sought by the gods, that were anxious to preserve their life against his fierce onslaughts, even though they had partaken of Amritam. Perceiving the Gopa boys with Sri Krishna at their head, the said Aghasura, the younger brother of Baki and Baka, Baki was Putana. Putana is actually not a name. Putana is a type of demon, like in the Atharva Veda and in various tantric rites done over young children and stuff. The type of Rakshasis called Putanas are mentioned. So this particular Putana's actual name was Baki. And Bakasura was her brother. And their younger brother is this one, Aghasura. All of them sent by Kansa. Aghasura thought thus: indeed, this chap is the slayer of my co-uterine brother and sister. In order to avenge the wrong done to both those kinsmen of mine, I shall dispatch him along with his followers. When these are made to serve as an offering for the propitiation of my aforesaid relations in place of sesame seeds and water, all the inhabitants of Raja will then be as good as dead. When life has departed, what cause of worry can there be about the bodies? For indeed the progeny are the life of those that live. Having thus resolved, and assuming the monstrous and wonderful form of a huge boa constrictor, 1 yojana long, that's about 8, there's different standards of a yojana, but the typical is about 8 miles long. So a huge supernatural serpent, and stout as a big mountain. The wicked fellow then lay down across the road with his cave-like mouth wide open, with the hope of devouring them. His lower lip rested on the earth, while the upper lip touched the clouds. The corners of his mouth looked like caverns. His fangs resembled mountain peaks. The interior of his mouth was full of darkness. His tongue was like a broad road. His breath was like a tempestuous blast, and he was burning hot with rage, his eyes resembling a wildfire. Perceiving him as such and taking him to be part of the beautiful landscape of Vrindavana, all in a sportive mood fancied it to be like the wide open mouth of a boa constrictor. And the children said to one another, "Oh, friends, tell us whether the semblance of a living being standing before us resembles or not the mouth of a serpent distended for devouring us." And one boy said, "True, The cloud turned reddish through the rays of the sun appears as though it were its upper jaw, while the earth below, ruddy through its reflection, looks like its lower lip. A third boy said, "Lo, the mountain caverns on its right and left vie with the corners of its mouth. These rows of lofty peaks look like fangs." And another child says, "This broad and long road vies with its tongue, while the darkness pent up in the midst of these mountain peaks look like the interior of the mouth." "Look here," said a boy. "This fierce wind, heated by some wildfire, seems like its breath, while the foul smell of animals burnt by it stinks like the flesh of animals in its belly." And then a boy is saying, "If it really is the mouth of a serpent, will it gulp us down when we have found our way into it? If so, it will perish like the heron in a moment at the hands of Sri Krishna." Saying so and staring at the bewitching face of Sri Krishna, the slayer of Baka, they went on, loudly laughing and clapping their hands. Thus, hearing thus the talk, which was far from the truth of those children, who were ignorant of the real fact, and thinking that the serpent, though real, appeared fictitious to them, and perceiving the python to be a Rakshasa, the Lord, installed in the heart of all living beings, made up his mind to restrain his companions. Meanwhile, the children, along with the calves, made their way into the bowels of the demon, but they were not immediately devoured by the Rakshasa, who awaited the entry of Sri Krishna, the slayer of Baka, remembering the death of his relations that had been slain by him. Perceiving the children, who in fact accounted him, Krishna, their sole protector, as having slipped out of his control and having turned into fodder for the gastric fire of Agha, who was terrible as death, and is thus reduced to a miserable plight, Sri Krishna, who vouchsafes protection to all, was moved with pity and at the same time astonished at the work of destiny. Deeply pondering as to what should be done under such circumstances, so that the life of this wicked one might not be prolonged and the death of these good fellows be averted, as to how both these purposes be achieved, the all-perceiving Sri Hari hit upon a plan and entered the mouth of the python. At that moment, the gods, who were ensconced behind a curtain of clouds, shrieked in terror, while the Rakshasas, who were friends of Agha, Kansa being the foremost of them, felt rejoiced. Hearing this, however, the immortal Lord Sri Krishna speedily grew to huge dimensions in the throat of the monster, who was eager to pulverize him along with the other children and calves too. Pent up and spread through the internal organs of the monster, whose throat was completely choked, whose eyes had bulged out, and who was rocking from side to side, his vital air thereupon forced its way out, splitting open all of a sudden the aperture in his crown. All his senses, too, having departed through that very passage, Lord Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation, revived the dead calves and friends by his mere life-giving look, and accompanied by them, then issued forth from the mouth of the monster. Setting ablaze with its luster all the 10 directions, a weird and powerful light rose from the robust body of the serpent, pausing a while in the air, awaiting the Lord's exit, and presently entered him, while the denizens of heaven looked on with wonder. Immensely rejoiced, the latter, the denizens of heaven, then offered their worship to the Lord who had accomplished their purpose. The Devas by showering flowers, and Apsaras through dances, the Gandharvas and others noted for their charming songs through their songs, and Vidyadharas and others well versed in instrumental music by playing on their instruments, the Brahmanas through their hymns of praise, and his attendants and devotees through shouts of victory. Hearing the auspicious sounds of those wonderful panegyrics, melodious instruments and songs and shouts of victory, etc., connected with a number of festivities, close to his own abode, in Satyaloka, the highest heaven, Brahma, the birthless one, came to the spot at once, and felt astonished to witness the Lord's glory. O Parikshit, the weird skin at Vrindavana of that python, when dry, served for a long time as a great hollow for the sports of the inhabitants of Raja. In other words, the children continued to play inside the dried out dead husk of the serpent. Observing that very moment this exploit of Sri Hari in the shape of delivering themselves as well as the serpent from death, in that Krishna had literally resurrected all of the Gopa boys and their calves from death, and liberated Aghasura from rebirth and re-death by granting him moksha. done in the 5th year, meaning the 5th year of Krishna's life. The Gopas recounted it full of astonishment in Vraja in his 6th year, a year later. They were, of course, still telling the story. It is no wonder on the part of the Supreme, who had assumed the semblance of a human child, the creator of the high and the low, that even Aghasura, whose sins had been washed away by his very touch, attained oneness with him, which is, as a matter of fact, most difficult to attain on the part of the unrighteous. Having actually entered the body of Aghasura, what indeed would he not give to that demon, the Lord who has kept Maya at a respectable distance from himself by virtue of his eternal realization of the blissful nature of his self? Nay, even a conceptual image of whose personality, once installed in the mind, has conferred the divine state on devotees like Katvangas. Sutta continued, having thus heard, O Brahmanas, the wonderful story of his protector, Emperor Parikshit, who had been gifted by his grandfather gifted to his grandfather by Sri Krishna, the Lord of the Yadavas, questioned the sage Shuka, the son of Vyasa, once more about the same sacred story that had captivated his mind. The Raja said, how could an act done at a distant time be conceived as having taken place at the present time, the Holy One? The cowherd boys related in his 6th year what had been done by Sri Hari in his 5th year. Tell me that, O great yogi. Great is our curiosity, O Guru. Surely this must be Sri Hari's Maya alone. It could not be otherwise. Though Kshatriyas in name alone, O Guru, we are most blessed in the world that we are repeatedly drinking through you the holy nectar in the shape of Sri Krishna's stories. Sutta went on. Questioned thus by Parikshit, the sage Shuka, the son of Badarayana, who was indeed robbed of all his senses by Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, of whom he was reminded by that question, answered him as follows. O crown jewel among the foremost votaries of the Lord, having slowly recovered his consciousness of the outer world with difficulty. Thus ends the 12th discourse in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 13, Brahma is seized with and ultimately rid of infatuation. So the question is about that. The way that Shuka said it seems to imply that a full year went by between the slaying of Aghasura and the Gopa boys talking about it and recounting it. That there seemed to be a weird skip of time implied by Parikshit's Shuka's phrasing that Parikshit was asking about. Sri Shuka began again. A good inquiry has been made by you, O highly blessed one, since though listening to the narrative of the Lord again and again, you lend it a new charm every time by your pertinent and intelligent queries, O jewel among the devotees of God. It is something natural with the righteous who choose what is best, that, like the topic of a woman to an assembly of gallants, the story of Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, appears quite new to them every moment, even through their speech, ears, and mind, even though their speech, ears, and mind are devoted to him alone. Listen, O king, with attention. I tell you even that which is most secret, for to a loving pupil, gurus impart even hidden things. Having rescued in the aforesaid manner his companions from death in the shape of Aghasura's mouth and brought them to the sandy riverbank, the Lord spoke as follows. Oh, so very delightful, O friends, is this bank consisting of soft and stainless sand, full of facilities for our play and surrounded by trees charming with the echo of the humming of bees and warbling of birds, drawn by the fragrance of budding lotuses, which makes the lake itself, containing lotus beds, appear full blown. Let us have our midday meal here. The day is already advanced and we are oppressed with hunger. Let the calves drink water and leisurely graze the grass near at hand. Saying Amen, the cowherd boys made their calves drink water, set them to feed on the green grass, opened their bags, and lunched with the Lord in great delight. Seated together round Sri Krishna in a number of circular rows, all facing him with blooming eyes, the cowherd boys of Raja shone brightly in the woodland like petals set round the pericarp of a lotus. Some dined on the petals of flowers and leaves, and others on young leaves, sprouts, fruits, bags, barks, and slabs, having converted them into plates. Severally describing to one another the exquisite taste each of his own dish, all took their midday meal in the company of the Lord, laughing and making others laugh. Bearing the flute between his belly and loincloth on the right side, and his horn and cane under the left armpit, and holding a buttered morsel of cooked rice and curds in his left hand, and preserved fruits stuck in between the fingers. Preserved fruits as in like raisins or dried prunes or dried fruits together with rice stuck between the fingers. Seated in the middle and inducing laughter in the friends surrounding him by his jokes. Lord Sri Krishna, the enjoyer of sacrifices, now engaged in childlike leelas, dined with them while the denizens of heaven looked on with wonder. While the cowherd boys, O Parikshit, scion of Bharata, were thus having their repast with their mind absorbed in Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, the calves, allured by luxuriant pasture, strayed far away into the woods. Seeing them obsessed with fear, the boys, when they realize that the calves have wandered off and are not here anymore, Sri Krishna, the terror even of death, said to them, "Friends, do not desist from eating. I shall fetch the calves back here." Saying so, Lord Sri Krishna went a-hunting for his calves in mountain caves, arbors, and forests, with the morsel still in his hand. Appearing in the meantime, Brahma the lotus-born, who while stationed in the sky had ere long felt highly astonished to witness the deliverance of Aghasura at the hands of the Almighty Lord, carried away from this place his calves, and then the Gopa boys too, to another place, O jewel of the Kurus, and hid himself in order to behold further delightful glory of the Lord appearing as a child through his enchanting Maya. Failing to find the calves there, and the Gopa boys too on the riverbank on returning to that spot, Sri Krishna looked for both on every side in the forest. Not perceiving the calves or their keepers anywhere within the forest, Sri Krishna, who, as a matter of fact, knew everything, at once clearly perceived it all to be the doing of Brahma, the creator. Presently, who is evidently kind of playing a prank on him, presently, in order to bring delight to their mothers as well as to Brahma, Sri Krishna, the Almighty Lord, the maker of the universe, made himself appear as both the calves as well as their keepers. A concrete illustration, as it were, of the Vedic dictum that everything consists of Vishnu. The all-formed Sri Krishna, the birthless Lord, appeared as many and of the same size as the tender forms of the small calves and their keepers, having the same number and size of hands and feet and other limbs, carrying the same number and size of staves, horns, flutes, whistles, etc., made of leaves and bags, decked with and clad in the same number and size of ornaments and clothes, assuming the same disposition and accomplishments, names, appearances, and age, and exhibiting the same sports, etc. Causing himself in the form of calves to be driven back from the forest by his own self in the form of their keepers, himself being the guide, and diverting himself with sports that represented his very self, Lord Sri Krishna, who embraced all, entered Vraja. Driving in the form of the various cowherd boys, separately the calves belonging to the different cowherd boys, and placing them in their respective stalls, he entered the houses of those cowherd boys and stayed there in the form of each such boy, O Parikshit. Rising in a hurry at the sound of the flutes, their mothers lifted them up in their arms and closely embracing them, suckled them, even though they had all long been weaned and are eating solid foods, with the milk of their breasts flowing through motherly affection, which was sweet as nectar and inebriating like the sap of the palm fruit, looking upon the supreme divinity as their own sons. Thus returning at dusk from the forest in the form of the Gopa boys, according to his scheduled round of leelas, and affording excessive delight by his winsome ways to his many mothers, Sri Krishna, the spouse of Lakshmi, was thereupon duly tended by them, a protector of men, by rubbing and cleaning his person with fragrant unguents, bathing him and painting his body with sandal paste and pigments of various kinds, decking him with ornaments, protecting him against the influence of evil spirits through the ritual of waving the tail of a cow over him, etc., applying the sacred tilaka mark on his forehead and feeding him, etc. Returning in great hurry from the forest to their pen, the cows too suckled each its grown-up calves with the overflowing milk of their udders, licking them all over again and again when they approached them on being called by their lowing sound. The motherly care of the cows and the cowherd women towards Sri Krishna in the form of their children was entirely the same as before, except the measure of their love which had inexplicably to them grown in all cases. They don't know why they suddenly love their children even more than ever before, but of course it's because it's in fact Krishna in person, in the form of their children. The filial feeling of Sri Hari, too, towards them was just the same as before, to the exclusion of attachment of the feeling of mindness. Day by day, for a whole year indeed, the creeper of affection of the inhabitants of Vraja for their own sons gradually grew to an immense degree, as it did for Sri Krishna in the past, and as it had never done before for their own children. Tending himself in the form of calves through his own self in the form of their keepers, the aforesaid Sri Krishna, the self of the universe, sported thus in the woods as well as in Vraja for a year as a keeper of calves. When about 5 or 6 nights were left to complete 1 year, Sri Krishna, the birthless Lord, 1 year since this had started, in other words, Sri Krishna, the birthless Lord, entered the forest one day along with Balarama, his elder brother, while pasturing the calves. Grazing grass on top of Mount Govardhana, the cows espied the calves pasturing in the vicinity of Raja far away from that summit. Overpowered with love for the said calves upon seeing them and forgetting themselves, that herd of cows rushed headlong with a series of bellowing sounds, ignoring their keepers as well as the difficult path down the hill, milk flowing from their udders all along, and looking like bipeds on account of their galloping gait, with their necks slightly contracted at the hump and their heads and tails erect. Approaching the calves below at the foot of Mount Govardhana, the cows, even though they had calved once more, suckled them with the milk of their udders, licking their limbs as though they would swallow them with intense eagerness. Arriving there in great anger and shame over the futility of their attempts to restrain the cows, and with a feeling of exertion caused by traversing the difficult paths, since they all just ran down the hill, the cowherds perceived their sons along with the calves. With their minds steeped in affection excited by their sight, they found their anger gone. Love having sprouted in them, they lifted the boys in their arms, embraced them, and experienced supreme delight by smelling them on the crown of their head as a gesture of affection. Highly gratified by embracing the young ones, the older cowherds slowly departed from that place with difficulty, tears gushing forth at the very thought of leaving their children. Since, of course, all of the love is supernaturally heightened by it being Krishna in the form of all the children. Perceiving the longing induced by abundance of love every moment on the part of the people and the cows of Raja, even for their offspring, long weaned from the mother's breast, Balarama, who failed to discover its cause, thought as follows: what a wonder it is that the love of the whole of Raja, including myself, towards the children is growing in intensity as it never did before, and even as it was in the past for Sri Krishna, the son of Vasudeva, the soul of the universe. What is this enchantment, and whence has it come? Is it the work of some god, of a human being, or a demon? In all probability, it must be the deluding potency of my Lord Sri Krishna and none other, for it has deluded even me, which no other Maya can. Pondering thus, Balarama, who belonged to the race of the Yadus, also known as the Dasharhas, saw through his intuitional eye all the calves as well as his companions to be none else than Lord Vishnu. Turning to Sri Krishna, he said, "These cowherd boys are not the rulers of gods, nor are these calves rishis, as I thought they were. You alone appear, O Lord, even in these different forms. Relate you in detail how all this happened." And Balarama thoroughly understood the whole incident related in a nutshell by the Lord when questioned as above. Returning, meanwhile, after a year, which passed as a moment according to his own measure of time, Brahma, the self-born, saw Sri Hari playing as before, even at the end of a year, along with his followers. As many cowherd boys, including the calves, there were in Gokula, are in fact all evidently reposing in the bed of my enchanting power, and have not yet risen again. Therefore, whence are these other than those deluded by my enchanting power, though as many in number, playing in the company of the all-pervading Lord for a whole year here in this woodland, as well as there in Vraja? Having thus contemplated on these differences for a long time, the self-born Brahma could not by any means ascertain as to which were the real ones, who existed even before they were removed by him, and which of the two groups were not so. Thus trying to delude Sri Krishna, the all-pervading Lord, who is proof against delusion and enchants the whole universe, Brahma the birthless, too, stood deluded himself by his own deluding potency, which he had attempted to employ against the Lord. Just as the darkness caused by mist gets merged in that of a night, and even as the light emitted by a firefly is merged in daylight, the inferior Maya of one employing it against the superior nullifies his own control over that power. It just gets merged into the more potent Maya. Meanwhile, before the very eyes of Brahma the birthless, who kept looking on, all the Gopa boys forthwith appeared dark as a cloud, clad in yellow silk, endowed with 4 arms, carrying a conch, a discus, a mace, and a lotus in their hands, adorned each with a diadem, earrings, a necklace of pearls, and a sylvan wreath, wearing on the upper part of their arms a pair of armlets illumined by the luster of the Srivatsa, and about their wrists a pair of bracelets made of precious stones marked with 3 lines like a conch, decked with anklets and bangles, girdles and rings, and covered all over their body from head to foot with fresh soft wreaths of tulsi leaves, offered by devotees possessed of abundant merit. By their sidelong glances cast from their ruddy eyes and accompanied by smiles bright as moonlight, they awakened desires in the heart of their devotees, and fulfilled them, as it were, with the help of Rajas and Sattva. They were severally waited upon with dances, music, and many other courses of worship by various types of created beings, animate and inanimate, from Brahma himself down to a clump of grass, all possessed of a living form. They were surrounded by mystic powers such as Anima and the other Ashtasiddhis, potencies like Maya, and the 24 elementary principles, the Mahatattva, and so on. They were waited upon by Kala, the time spirit, Swabhava, the mutability of matter, Sanskara, or latent desire, Kama, Karma, the gunas, all endowed with a living form, with their glory eclipsed by the glory of these divine forms. They were embodiments of the one absolute essence, consisting of truth, consciousness, infinitude, and bliss alone. Their infinite glory was unapproachable indeed, even by those whose eye is self-knowledge. In this way, once Brahma the birthless saw them all as identical with the transcendent absolute Brahman, by whose effulgence is this entire creation, including animate and inanimate beings, stands revealed. Thereupon turning away his gaze in great wonder, and with all his 11 Indriyas, having been overpowered by their splendor, Brahma the birthless one stood mute like a doll by the side of the deity presiding over the land of Raja. When Brahma, when Brahma, the spouse of Saraswati, thus got perplexed as to what it might be with regard to the Lord, who cannot be comprehended through reason, possesses a glory peculiar to himself, who is of the nature of bliss shining by itself, who is beyond the realm of Maya, and who is known through the Upanishads, forming the crown of the Vedas, by the process of negating what he is not, through the neti method. When he was unable to perceive even those divine forms, Sri Krishna, the supreme birthless Lord, who perceived his perplexity, immediately drew off the curtain of his Maya. Having now regained his vision outside, Brahma rose like a dead man brought to life again, and opening his eyes with great difficulty, beheld once more this universe along with his own self. Looking round at once in every direction, he saw stretched before him the woodland of Vrindavana, thick with trees that served as a means of subsistence to the people, and having agreeable objects scattered all around, where creatures bearing natural and inveterate enmity, such as human beings and carnivorous beasts, lived together like friends, and from which anger, thirst for enjoyment, etc., had disappeared, due to Sri Krishna, the invincible Lord, having taken up his abode there. Brahma, the highest functionary of the universe, beheld there the secondless, transcendent, infinite absolute, possessed of fathomless wisdom, playing the role of a child born in the line of a cowherd, and looking about all alone as before for the calves and its companions, with a morsel of cooked rice still in his hand. Perceiving this, and hastily alighting from his mount, the divine swan, Brahma stretched his body like a staff of gold on the ground, and touching the Lord's feet with the crest of his 4 crowns, one after another, and bowing down, bathed them with limpid water in the form of tears of joy. Recollecting again and again the glory, witnessed ere long, of Sri Krishna, he rose again and again, and remained lying down at his feet for a long time. Then, slowly rising and rubbing his eyes, he gazed at Sri Krishna, and with his head bent low and composed in mind, he proceeded in great humility with joined palms to extol the Lord in a faltering voice and with a trembling body. And thus ends the 13th discourse in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. And I'm thinking we could perhaps end there. The prayer that Brahma says is rather long. The next discourse goes on for quite a few pages of Brahma praising Krishna. So given that it's 10 a.m., it might make sense to start with that next time.
Sounds beautiful.
Thank you guys very much for coming.
Thank you, Devla.
Yeah, Happy New Year as well.
Happy New Year. Jai Ganesh. Jai Krishna.
Jai Ganesha, Jai Sri Krishna.